Can you tell the difference between the sound of a tube amp and a digital modeler? Grab your headphones. Let's take this audio deep dive right now. I'm back. Did you even know I was gone? Well, maybe some of you did. It's been a while since I've posted some videos, but I was in Europe. I did a concert with the Metropole Orchestra in Holland. We filmed a bunch of stuff, so can't wait to show you some of that. And then I went to the UK and I visited the Marshall factory and I went to Anderton's. And I also did a guitar clinic in the UK for Anderton's. Now, in that clinic, I played Eruption twice, and that is the premise of this video. Remember when I asked you, can you tell the difference between a Fractal and an amp when it's being played? Well, watch these two versions of Eruption, and then we're going to get into the comments that people have made because I've posted these versions on Instagram, and it's kind of interesting to see how people have deduced which one is which and what they're saying. So watch these two versions of Eruption, and then let's come back and I will give you all of the details. So stick around. There's a very good chance I won't play this well. I'll give it a go. Close. Thank you. By the time it gets to the end of the tapping, my forearm is burning so bad. There you have it. That's Eruption. Oh, hold on. Something's weird here. We're still in social media aspect ratio. Let's fix that. Now, this is broken. Okay. All right. Okay, you've seen both versions and you're probably still wondering which one is which. I'm going to share that information with you at the end of this video. I'm also going to go through some of the comments that people made on Instagram. But before I do that, let's get into the basic criteria of how to judge these things, tuning your ears to what we're trying to listen for here. So I played Eruption twice. The sound was pretty different, one to the other. One had more of the sound of the record because it had effects and it had the reverb and it even had the special effect at the end where the delay gets turned down and then it changes pitch. But the other one was basically more raw. Now, which one is which? Okay, we're going to get into that, but right before we do, I want you to try to consider what I was trying to do when I was dialing in the sound for both. Now, the record has a very specific sound. The mastered record is very different than the guitar sound that was recorded as the performance. It ends up being mixed, it ends up being EQ'd, it has compression, it has all these things that color the sound or give it some other kind of detail or nuance or character. So how much of that do you try to put into programming if you're doing a fractal or any kind of a modeler? And then how much of that can you actually get out of playing directly into an amplifier? These are the things to consider. And when I actually did the programming for the fractal, the choice I made was to get closer to the sound of the guitar as it might have been on the stage or in the studio while he was performing, because if I went all the way to the very edge of brightness that a mastered record would have, if that sound was coming out of the speakers at that giant volume, it would be way too bright and it would hurt your ears. So I chose to get as close to the character as I could, but when it comes to the amplifier, I'm just trying to get it to feel as close to it as I can and get as much gain out of the amp without using any kind of extra stuff, without using an overdrive or compressor or anything. It was just the guitar into the amp. Now, this particular amp, the JCM 900 Studio Head, was an amp I had never played before until that day, and I was surprised that I could get a sound that actually felt very Van Halen-ish to me. Now, did it get all the way to the maximum amount of gain? I don't know. We don't know which one's which yet. Now, do we? So my point is, when you're listening for these things, you have to take into consideration that it's not so much that you try to copy the exact sound of the record. It's, do you have a sound that's going to sound good with a band or in a performance situation that will be balanced enough and still have the character, the nuance, the detail, the personality that you're looking for? So that's my approach to it. But it's funny to see that that's actually kind of reflected in the comments that people said about the two different versions of the performance. Okay, let's get into the statistics from Instagram. There were over 200 comments across the videos, but people actually made votes as to which one they thought was which. Let's get into that right now. Version number 1, there were 64 votes, at least at the time that I was making this video. And of the people who thought it was a Marshall, there were 16, and fractal votes were 42. All right, so that's for version 1. Now, version number 2, 68 votes total, 28 people thought fractal, 40 people thought Marshall. Now, this is interesting because when we actually find out the real results here, we're going to see something that is a little bit unexpected, but we'll get into that at the end of the video. So let's just hear some of the comments that people have made. So version number 1 comments. One guy just says fractal. Another guy says, that sounds fantastic. I would choose fractal here. It's not really easy to tell them apart. Nonetheless, you are the #1 fractal master. Thank you. All right. Now, somebody else, GDS 5150. You and Wolf, to me, are the only ones who get as close as possible to the man. There are lots of others that sound great, but they're just not the same. I've been saying this for a long time and I stand by it still. Dweezil Zappa. So he's being very complimentary. Thank you very much. He did not choose which one was which, but somebody other than that said, yes, I think Fractal. All right, so now next, I see that there's going to be some times where people will make a comment and then they will probably regret it later. So some of these will come up like that. Sounds killer regardless, but I would say Fractal seems a tad thinner to my ears. This is a comment that comes up with modelers. People think a modeler or Fractal has to be thinner. It can't be as good as the real amplifier. So as we progress, we can see these things get flipped on people. Let's find a good example of that. All right, here we go. Number 1 is the Marshall. The second one is Fractal. This is still on video number 1. Wildman Fisher says it's the Fractal. Another guy says, Fractal, the sound is great. I prefer version 1. So didn't say if it was a Fractal or not. He just likes that one. This guy, Tim Croydon, both versions sounded great in the room. He was there. Didn't get a chance to ask, but do you build your Fractal patches on IRs or specific bits of real gear or just use standard IR models? Now, that's a good question. I actually make my own IRs, impulse responses. Maybe one day I will actually make them all available to you. But it is good to be able to choose a specific speaker that you want to use as your sound device. So that's a good question. Now, let's keep going. One guy says, nailed it. Now try playing through a Magnatone Super 59. That was Michael Hanahan, number 7. Michael, send me the amp and I will try it out. All right. One person says, I think this is a real amp. Performance. All right. So that was Israeli Tabarelli. I probably butchered that. Sorry about that. All right, here we go. What's the next one? This one's interesting. He says, this is Funk Guitars USA. I cannot see this being a Marshall. The 900 does not have this kind of gain or this kind of sound unless you're adding something else to the mix and you are not telling us. This is an astute observation. This will come in play later. All right. Fractal, still not as warm. This is a comment that I kind of love and hate because people use the word warm in various ways to describe analog audio or audio in general. They just have to say it's warm because it makes them feel good. Now, this is acceptable, but it doesn't always mean that a modeler cannot sound warm. This person will disagree, and it might come back to bite them. All right, so somebody else says that was the Fractal. There's so much here, and this is all still version number 1. Let me find something else that is, okay, version 1, Fractal, this is what this guy says, appears to have more butter on it, effects, etc., slightly less dynamic. Version number 2, which he thinks is the Marshall, is cleaner, sharper, sweeter sound, especially when digging in. To me, anyways. Curious as to which one is which. You will find out soon. All right. Sounds like Fractal here. You are most indeed the best, and I have never heard anyone cover Eruption as accurate. Thank you. This guy, Elo Ewick. The balls you need to play on that stage to stand alone in front of a whole room of guitar players that are scrutinizing every note. Yes, it's terrifying. This guy says, cone.png. Well, this sounds exactly perfect, so it must be the Fractal. All right, so we're seeing a lot of people thinking that version 1 is the Fractal. Some of them are preferring the sound of the Fractal, and some people are making comments as to say, well, I don't think it's the Fractal, or I do think it's the Fractal because it sounds less warm, or it doesn't sound real in some way. So let's move on to version 2 comments. Okay, version 2 people are saying, well, this guy doesn't actually make a comment about the performance. He just says, can you have one guitar in your collection that's not absolutely a unique piece of custom art or a masterpiece? Every time you pull out an axe, I'm always like, what the fuck is that? Well, I'm glad you're interested, and thank you. Okay, this person, Herb Burt 76. I vote Marshall because I said Fractal on the other video. So this guy's playing both sides of the fence here. Marshall, Fractal sounded better. Wild time to be alive. So here we get into an area where you could like both, and you might prefer a Fractal over a Marshall if indeed he chose correctly. Now, this guy says, this is great, but the other video, Fractal version 1 is what he's referring to, sounded closer to the recording. Also very interesting. People are noticing that you might be able to dial in a modeler to be closer to a recording than just plugging straight into an amp. That is a possibility. So let's see what else. Some guy on version number 2, he says, definitely Fractal. The way the notes kind of die on the vine is what I experience on my Kemper and Fractal and other sim devices. I could be wrong. Sounds Marshall-y though. So he flipped on his own answer. So what I'm seeing is it's hard to tell the difference between the two. And when I was talking about tuning your ear to the preferences of what you're trying to create, the nuances and detail in the music, that's where this becomes a different thing. Because as we get closer to the answer, which I'm about to share with you, the real thing that I'm finding is that people are pretty good at telling which one is which, but the one that they think is the amp, there are even more people that get that wrong than when they think it is the Fractal. So I'm going to tell you what the answers are in just a second, but I want to show one more thing that puts a whole wrench into all of this. I'm going to play part of Edward Van Halen's actual performance and then part of my performance. And we'll A/B those actual audio clips and see if any of them are even remotely in the ballpark compared to the actual performance. So let's check it out. So we've just heard Edward Van Halen himself play Eruption, and then two different versions of me playing bits and pieces of Eruption. Now, I put that in there because sometimes people make comments about how something sounds, but they're not really doing an A/B comparison, and they might misremember how the original recording sounds. So here's a good way to basically tune your ears to the actual source material and then see how close the other stuff gets to it. And the whole point of this exercise is to say that there's incredible equipment out there that you can use to get a sound that is close to a record. Now, modelers like a Fractal or any of the other things that are out there are there specifically because amps sound great in the real world, and everybody loves the sound of tube amplifiers. But it's not always practical to use them, and sometimes a modeler can be helpful in other ways. And what I've done in this video is shown how I've been able to use the two different kinds of technology and get in the ballpark to the original recording. And if you listened to Edward play it and then my two versions, and you're still guessing which one is which, I'd love to see your comments below. But right now, I'm going to tell you which one was which. Number 1 was the Fractal. Version number 2 was the Marshall. Of course, there's a difference in the gain because the 900, the JCM 900 studio amp, It has 2 channels. One has way more gain than the channel that I used. I cranked up the first channel, the cleaner channel, because it sounded more like a plexi to me. And I got very close to the feel of the Van Halen sound that I was looking for. Did I want a little bit more gain? Yes, I did, but I didn't have it available. I just plugged straight in, and there was some reverb that comes in the amp, and truth be told, I added a tiny bit of reverb into the version that you're hearing on the video because it just sounded a little bit better, a little bit more like you could go between version 1 and 2, and it was a similar kind of listening experience. Now, the Fractal was fully programmed to sound as close to the record as possible, but not the finished mastered record, because the finished mastered record is quite bright. A lot of people say, oh, it's the warm tone, you know, it's the brown sound. But Van Halen 1, the mastered, especially the remastered version, is very, very bright. And it's brighter than the sound he had in the room. And that's the important point, the nuance here, like I was saying before. If you're gonna make a sound that you're gonna program and it's gonna be for a performance on stage with a band, it might not be beneficial to try to recreate the exact sound of a finished album, because coming through a PA speaker, it might be too bright and it will sound too small, and you need it to have more girth in the room. And a lot of people say, oh, it doesn't push air. Well, if you're using a speaker of some sort, it's pushing air. How much air depends on how many speakers and how loud it is, obviously. But at the end of the day, like I was saying, we love the sound of tube amplifiers, and technology is at a place now where modelers can get the feel and the character and the nuance of the sound, especially in a recording, to the point where it will make it confusing for the end user, the listener, to actually tell which one is which. A lot of people did a very good job being the detective and guessed correctly on Instagram, but it certainly wasn't a complete home run where everybody nailed it. There were plenty of people who thought that the Marshall was the Fractal and would say, oh, it's definitely the Fractal because it's not pushing air, when it was the Marshall through a 412 cabinet. So my point is, things are getting closer. There are great sounds, there are great tools out there. I'm excited to be able to use any and all of them, and I would love to be a great resource for people to have more of this type of information. So if you have questions for me, or if there's other things you want to see me do that do this kind of breakdown, let me know in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you very soon on my channel, and get ready for a huge amount of content from my trip to Europe, and I look forward to sharing it all with you. See you soon. Oh, one more thing, just a reminder, the Eruption performance that you saw, it came from a full masterclass guitar clinic that I did in the UK, which I will present to you on my YouTube channel in its entirety, and it's coming very soon. So like and subscribe, and again, I will see you soon.